Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live Q&A. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Alicia. How are you doing this beautiful, I guess it's a Thursday morning in Alberta?
September 1st, Mark, it's back to school. So today was the day. Kids are getting on the buses and they're just starting to run and making sure that they have all their backpacks and things put together. So it was a little bit of a chaotic morning this morning.
Well, for us down here, we've got another week. So I don't know what they're doing, but well, I shouldn't say, yeah, no, it is next week. So we've got another week before the kids go back to school. So I only have one that needs to go back to school now. She's pretty self-sufficient going into grade 12. So this is the time and the season. Yes, September. And what's happening on the express entry front? Well, I think we saw another draw yesterday.
Yeah, I guess we can flip over and take a look at the draw and give a little update in terms of Express Entry is still clicking along, which is good. So you can always go to the Express Entry rounds of invitations and it's going to give you the most current one here. So we've got
Looks like August the
August.
17th.
Yeah,
Let's see. Did we? I thought we let's redo this one here. I thought we had a draw yesterday. Wow.
maybe
Maybe
we
I'm
haven't had
missing
a draw
something.
yesterday.
I thought we did. I was sure we did.
We've historically been having draws every
Hmm.
couple weeks, but August 17th is the last one on there.
Well, interesting. I was looking at I was looking at the announcements, and I'm actually quite surprised that because I was sure that there was one. Interesting. Well, hey, we're living the dream here, aren't we? We there's certain assumptions I always make when we jump on, and that one assumption is that every Wednesday they're going to do another draw, and so I'm going to dig into that because I'm positive that there was a draw. I'm positive, but why it's not materializing here, it's all good. All right, so let's jump in, Alicia, and with that failed venture of updating the express entry pandemonia here, let's jump into our featured question for today. And the featured question is this: can you work remotely for a Canadian employer and still get your TRV approved?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up in lots of different circumstances. And I do see a comment that they said we did have a draw and there were 2,750 ITAs, but they didn't update the page and there's a bug
Mhm.
in it. And I don't know what the cutoff CRS is there. So we'll see. We'll see if somebody else fills in the fact that IRCC has failed to update their page on Express
Thank
Entry
you.
rounds of
Thank you.
invitation.
Thank you. And then AR saying, delete the cash, man. Delete the cash, man. It happened. All right. Well, we got people that are connecting in. We love the engagement. All right.
Yeah, good
So
job.
the question of all questions.
So the question, can you work remotely for a Canadian employer and get a TRV? And so there's a number of things that we'll have to make assumptions about if this is the question. So one is we're assuming then that this person is outside Canada and does not yet have any status inside of Canada. And working remotely for a Canadian employer, as long as it is purely you are physically located outside of Canada, you're not entering the Canadian labor market, but you've got to be sure that you're not entering the Canadian labor market. And so this is one thing, Mark, maybe you can flip over to a little bit of the program guidance in terms of the operational instructions and guidelines. And this is what immigration officers look at to see, well, is this person working without authorization in Canada? Because the general rule is that everybody must have a work permit in order to enter the Canadian labor market. But, and this is the definition of work under Regulation 2, so it's very, very broad. Anything for which commissions are paid or wages are paid or commission is earned, or that you're competing directly against a Canadian citizen or permanent resident and you're entering the Canadian labor market. And it gives some examples, wages or commission, what's an activity that competes directly. So, are you doing something that is taking a job away from a Canadian that a Canadian would normally be doing within the workforce? Is it competitive in the marketplace? And they give some examples of what is work. So, self employment could constitute a competitive activity. Unpaid employment. So a lot of times people say, well, I'll just come volunteer. But if you're volunteering to complete a job that a Canadian employer would normally have to pay a Canadian to do, then it's not technically volunteering. It's considered work for immigration purposes. Then it goes into some types of activities that are not considered to be work. So to answer the question, if you're working from outside Canada for a Canadian company, is it considered work if you're doing long distance work? And so if you look down at that third bullet point, for sure it's not considered work if you're doing long distance by telephone or internet work done by a temporary resident whose employer is outside Canada and who is remunerated from outside Canada. But that's not the situation here, right? So you get a little bit more into a gray zone if you are doing long distance work for a Canadian employer, and especially if you're also getting paid in Canadian currency into a Canadian bank account. So that is getting into the gray zone of it. An officer might consider it work in some circumstances. Normally, if you're physically outside of Canada and you are not stepping foot inside the country, then often people are not doing work. They're not entering the Canadian labor market. But the question in this case is, can you now get a TRV? Can you come to Canada and get a visitor's visa if you've been working remotely for a Canadian company? And of course, we know that to get a temporary residence visa or a visitor visa, you've got to show temporary intent and you've got to show that you're complying with the conditions of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And the usual rule is that a visitor to Canada is not allowed to work for any sort of Canadian company. We saw the definition of work, we saw what's entering the Canadian labor market. So that's where the rubber hits the road, is you've got to be completely honest in terms of what you have been doing. If an officer's asking you questions about that, then you've got to respond truthfully. If there is any indication that you're going to be coming into Canada to work, then you have to apply for a work permit. And most of the time, the Canadian company has to have obtained a labor market impact assessment, an LMIA, before somebody can apply for a work permit. And most of the time, they have to apply from outside Canada for that work permit supported by the LMIA.
Now I'm going to throw an additional little twist on you, Alicia. You know, we've got a lot of questions that revolve around express entry. And so one of the things people ask is, if I'm working remotely for that Canadian employer, I'm outside of Canada, can I count that work experience towards express entry?
No. And the answer is in the ministerial instructions. So if we look at the definition of Canadian work experience, it's clear that that Canadian work experience has to have been completed or earned or gained while you were working for a Canadian company inside of Canada. And so things with the pandemic have really changed the way a lot of people are working. But hopefully they were still working somewhere physically inside of Canada while they were completing that. If they've left Canada and gone back to their home country, then they are not able to claim that period of time for Canadian Express entry points for Canadian work. So they'll have to take a look at how many hours, how many weeks they have been working in Canada. No more than 30 hours, add that up over the term of a year or 2 years, depending on whether you've been working full-time or part-time, and you've got to get to that 1,560 hours.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, there we go. So that is the question of the day. Now, if you want to go ahead and I'm just going to pull up our YouTube channel here, Alicia. If you want to propose a question to be included in next week's live Q&A with Alicia, all you have to do is click in the description for our live video right here. We have a link. We'll pop that, slow this one down here. I'll share the screen now. If you go here and you go to the your view, essentially, and you scroll down, you will see that there is right here a link for submit your question for the next live Q&A. And when you click on it, yes, I want to go to the site. It will then take you right here where you can post your question. And then we will choose amongst all of the great questions that are posted to be our feature question for the week. So that's where you go, and you can easily find it in the description on the YouTube live stream right where you guys are watching. All right. Okay, Alicia. Well, let's dive into some questions here. Everybody was saying, Mark, you just need to delete your cache. You just need to hit Control-Shift-R or something like that. And then that will do it. Let's see if it does here. Oh, And now I started it again here. Let me pull back and let's just pull this up here. Okay, so we'll put them to the test here. So this is, I love the instructions. We'll give a shout out here to Mohammed. Okay, Mohammed, let's see if this works, my friend. So Control-Shift-R. Oh, that's not it. Let's try this again. I got to choose the right page here. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Let's try this again. Command-Shift-R. Well, it refreshed it. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Brilliant.
Magic.
There it is. Thanks, Mohammed. So August the 31st, there's our 2750. 516 was the round of invitation score, the lowest ranked candidate. And that's what happens when they continue to purge out larger numbers. The scores will continue to drop down. And if we look historically now, we can see it here. You can see slowly, Alicia, slowly. So this one, we dropped 9 points down to here. How many more draws do you think it's going to take before it hits below 500? What do you think?
I don't know. That's the question, and we'll have to see whether that collides with a change in targeted draws that may or may not happen in the fall. We're not sure how quickly that's going to roll out. And of course, everybody's been talking about TEER. So TEER, we're moving from that 4-digit NOC system that's using the old NOC tables from 2016 to the new NOC, which is a 2021 version, but it's going to be effective and implemented as of November 16th, 2022. And it'll be a 5-digit NOC code. So.
Yes. And I know there's rumblings, and I think it's hard because we don't always have 100% certainty what the government is going to do. But the minister has said in passing that he may even wait until the new year to roll out the targeted draws. But you know what? It just all depends. So we watch and we wait just like all of you guys do. All right, Nathan's got a question here. Nathan says, is it smart to apply for jobs before arriving in Canada as a student?
And so, Nathan, this goes to, when can you work? How much can you work if you are issued a study permit? And there are two scenarios. So sometimes people come and their term of studies involves a mandatory co-op or internship term. And so people also apply for a study permit and then a co-op work permit. So that co-op work permit will be issued as part of that study permit if your program of studies has a mandatory co-op or internship component, and that's listed right on your letter of acceptance. So if you are working for that internship, you do need to have that co-op work permit, and you're able to work as much as required under the program for that period of time. It's normally only a few months. It's normally only a term or maybe a maximum of 1 to 3 months. But people who are full-time students, so you are actively pursuing your studies, and immigration actually defines this in terms of what constitutes actively pursuing your studies. But basically, you have to be completing your assignments, not failing your courses, and taking a full-term course load. If you are doing that, then you're authorized to work 20 hours a week during school and full-time during registered or regular school breaks. And people get in trouble here when they look at what is a regularly scheduled school break, because it depends on the program. But yes, if you are looking to do some part-time work while you're here as a student, it does make sense to start looking for jobs ahead of time so that you can finance some of the expenses of living in Canada and studying in Canada by working part-time. Be really careful that you are only working 20 hours per week maximum during that school year as a full-time student.
All right, let's go. I'm going to go back to our helpful friend here, if I can find all of the questions that I've identified. Let's see here. I know Mohammed had another question I wanted to pull up here for him. Okay, this one is this is kind of open, and it's not easy to, we're kind of just guessing or predicting, but he says, hey, Mark and Alicia, shall I have a hope that NOC 2171 will become easily chosen after Bill C-19 is implemented? So what do you think, Alicia, when people ask these questions? Obviously, we don't have crystal balls, but, 2171 versus, say, a food service supervisor at McDonald's.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, actually, because I was just looking at NOC 2171 and some of the other tech NOCs yesterday with clients. And because of the new tier system, they are getting bifurcated. A lot of them had like data analysts and IT developers or things like that. So they have two things under one NOC, which are now getting split off into two different NOCs. And in general, Canada's facing a labor shortage right now. We have a relatively high
Mhm.
unemployment rate and not enough Canadians to fill those roles. And we do generally have a lack of IT workers. So there's a number of provinces where we're short on IT workers. So it is possible that some of these IT professions might be ones that the government is going to target, but it's probably really going to depend upon what the provincial data shows for job prospects. And so most of the linked job bank sites will have a outlook. They'll have a job outlook button. And you can kind of take a look, and if it has a better job outlook, then hopefully those are the types of professions that the minister might be targeting in terms of trying to get more applicants and more PRs who are getting landed under express entry. So
Let's
let's
take a
take a
look.
look here.
Yeah, let's take a look. So, trend, outlook, and then let's punch in 2171. And do you have any? It doesn't really matter which title we choose, you guys, but let's pull it up and just take a peek just for kicks. So, things are looking bright in Newfoundland and Labrador for that position. And maybe you can explain the 3 stars. So, this
Yeah, so if you
undetermined,
look at
limited, fair, good.
Yeah, if you look at the legend, job opportunities are undetermined. So 0 stars is probably not so good, or they just don't have enough data. 1 star is limited, right? So it's not likely that that job is going to be in demand. 2 is fair, and 3 would be good. So hopefully the positions that have a 3-star ranking in multiple provinces are ones that might be targeted by the federal government when they're looking at trying to do targeted draws.
Yep.
And you can look at this data across the provinces. So this is for the Maritimes, but you can scroll down and you've got PEI, also in the Maritimes.
Nova
Nova Scotia's
Scotia's
in the
3
Maritimes.
stars.
Yeah.
New Brunswick. Well, wow. Quebec.
Quebec is still good, so you still have a good rating in Quebec. Ontario is good, and these are our more populous provinces.
Wow.
Manitoba is good.
I think 2171 is good. Saskatchewan, Alberta,
Yeah,
and of course, British Columbia. Yeah. Clean sweep. It's been a while. Well, obviously,
except
the
for
Northwest
not enough.
Territories and Nunavut.
Yeah,
And, yeah.
not enough.
Yukon. But it's been a while since I've seen 3 stars across the board. So that's well, things are looking good for 2171. Maybe.
Maybe. So, Mohammed, we don't have a crystal ball, but the government should be working off of some sort of data. And if we look at the job outlook data, that's probably one of the places to start your search in terms of, is it likely that that occupation is going to be in demand?
All right, let's go to our next question. This one is from Mary. She says, should volunteer activities be mentioned in work history post invitation to apply, or is it only paid work that is considered employment? Thank you.
Okay, and Mary, this gets back to our question from last week about, do you have to list all of your work experience in your express entry work experience categories? So anything that is not paid work is not going to give you points for express entry. So you should be putting anything that's a volunteer activity into your personal history. So you do need to list it and explain it, but make sure that you are putting it into your personal history. You can go back and check out the video from last
Yeah,
week when we
this one
were
right here.
specifically addressing this question. Yeah.
There we go. A little distraction there. All right. Okay. Next question. This one is from Jake. Let's see if we can pull up Jake here. Oh, I lost him. Oh, there he is. Okay. This is Jake. He says, I took a 2-week paid time off and went to the US. So paid vacation. Would I be able to count that as Canadian experience for CEC? 52 weeks are required, or is it better to wait for another draw to account for the missed time?
Yeah. And It does depend probably a little bit on the circumstances and whether there was any other time off in terms of were there COVID shutdowns, were there times when the office wasn't opened, were there other times when you were on unpaid breaks. But generally, if you're taking a regular scheduled holiday or if part of vacation time was part of what was under your contract and you were getting paid for that time off, then that should normally count towards your 52 weeks. So you worked a whole year, 2 weeks of which you were on paid vacation. That should normally be fine. It's when people have taken unpaid breaks or when there have been business shutdowns or temporary layoffs that it then becomes a big problem. You do have to disclose it if asked questions about it. You've got to show that you've got payroll records to prove that you were paid for that entire time. So make sure that you account for that.
All right, let's shift over to an express entry proof of funds question. So Wah says, hey, Mark, do I need to liquidate my mutual funds as proof of funds for express entry?
Mm-hmm. So if you look at the proof of funds section on express entry, it does talk about what sort of financial instruments and what sort of proof, I guess, you can provide to meet that settlement amount. And keep in mind that when we're talking about proof of funds, you don't need to prove proof of funds if you have been invited under CEC or in other specific circumstances when you're getting points for arranged employment. But generally, if you're under federal skilled worker, then you do need to prove funds. So here's what they're saying in terms of what is accepted as proof. And yeah, it has to be readily available to you. And so it also says the funds have to be available when you apply and when the permanent residence visa is issued. So you've got to be able to legally access those funds. And it really depends on whether you can legally access those mutual funds, how they're held, what sort of financial instrument they are in, and how you can access them if there's any sort of trust relationship there. So be careful to make sure that any of the money that you are proving and the bank account statements and the letters from the bank that you are providing show that those funds are accessible to you at the time that you apply and then at the time that you're hopefully granted your COPR.
All right. Next question here. All right. So this one is Anchumanpes. Says, if I leave Canada while my work permit extension application is in progress, can I continue to work from outside Canada for a few weeks? Mm-hmm.
This is a whole can of worms. It really depends on what kind of work permit application you have submitted. Generally, if you have left Canada, then you lose your interim authorization or your implied status. And so it really depends, Angie Mampes, if you have what kind of work permit you have, whether you are from a visa required country, whether you have a multiple entry visa. You should be able to continue to work for your employer if you still have a valid work permit, but you may not be allowed back into the country depending on what kind of work permit extension you submitted. So you'll lose your implied status. So this is something that you've got to be super careful about. If you have any concerns or questions, I would say please book a consult and talk to us directly about your circumstances.
Yes, exactly. Okay, let's get to our next question. This is from Sid. He says, is Cedric the man for criminal admissibility consultations? Also, what would wounding or grievous bodily harm, I've seen this already, Sid, a max 3 years sentence equate to in Canada? Does rehabilitated overseas also mean the same in Canada? So that you guys that's definitely one of these right here. As far as I can answer this one, as far as Cedric being the man for criminal admissibility, we can all assist you with that. So this is something that definitely requires an equating of the elements of the offense. So a simple title or whatever the offense is named in your country, wounding or grievous bodily harm, doesn't really mean anything to us from that standpoint. We actually need to look at the elements of the offense and equate it to see if it would match up with a corresponding offense under the Canadian Criminal Code or an act of Parliament in Canada. And then from that basis, we can then determine if rehabilitation is needed and to what extent an overseas pardon may possibly remove the need for a more formal rehabilitation application. But yeah, definitely this is a consult in the making.
Yeah, and it's not only a consult, but it's a whole bunch of legal research. And so we do these, Sid. I've done a number of these in the past. It involves a whole bunch of checking the foreign legislation, the Canadian legislation, the time of the commission of the offense. And then it also has to do, as Mark was saying, with whether a foreign rehabilitation or a pardon or maybe an expungement is the same to what used to be called a pardon in Canada, which is now, criminal rehabilitation or a records expungement. So it really, really is very case specific, and it requires a bunch of delving into the circumstances to give an actual written opinion on this.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Miriam says, hey, Mark and Alicia, should the purpose of travel be specific, like attending a concert, or more general, leisure, in an ITA travel history? So in the context of express entry. Thanks very much.
Yeah. And I would say whatever is accurate, right? So you can say that it was business purposes, or you can say it was study purposes, or you could say leisure. And, probably attending a concert might not fit on some of the forums. Most of the time, people say tourism or leisure as the reason if it was attending a concert, for example.
Got a little ahead of myself there. Let's pull that one back. I can't remember which one I pulled up now. Okay, here we go. I think sometimes it's almost easier to be in the moment here when I'm looking through questions, trying to find the best ones. And sometimes it's a little bit more challenging than when I'm fully engaged talking to people. So, all right. So Pisai says, the purpose of your visit to Canada is not consistent with a temporary stay, given the details you have provided in your application. Mark, could you please elaborate what exactly the visa office is looking for? I'm assuming this is the wording in a refusal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, book a consult. If you have been refused, and the reason for, or one of the reasons for the refusal was that the immigration office doesn't think that whatever you've put in your application is consistent with a temporary stay, you've got some big problems, because there's something in there that says that you haven't proven a temporary intent, that maybe you don't have strong enough ties to your home country, maybe you haven't given enough details in terms of what your pull factors back home are, but maybe you have too many indications that you are going to stay in Canada, that you have family in Canada, that you have a history of being in Canada in the past, that you have a whole bunch of pull factors to Canada in this case that is preventing them from thinking that you will actually return home at the end of your authorized period of stay.
Yes. All right, let's follow up here with Sid here. He says, I'm so confused. Do I go with Mark, Alicia, or Cedric? According to the introductions, it seems like Cedric was the one. Okay, so what he's referring to is on our website, we provide kind of areas of focus. So these are kind of the areas that we like to focus and we really enjoy working in. Does it mean that we cannot provide direction and advice on a whole bunch of other ones? Well, no, it doesn't. But these are the areas that we really like to focus in. That's why we say areas of focus here. And as you go through here, you can see Chanel and Cedric's got a little bit more comprehensive list of things going on. But the reality is, regardless of what we have here, any of us would be perfectly fine. And if I was to kind of summarize things, I guess, if you felt like you wanted Sid to book the consult with Cedric, then go ahead. It's totally fine. You're going to be well serviced. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Anytime any of us lawyers run into situations that might be just something we've never come across before, we talk, we share, we post, you collaborate. We really collaborate on anything that is really out there or challenging or new. And in the end, it just helps to elevate the expertise of all of the lawyers within the firm. So good question though, Sid. All right. Let's see. We'll get the question from Julian. Okay. So Julianne says, hey, Mark and Alicia, what about people that have been working for over a year for the same company within Canada with a valid work permit? Can they migrate to work remote from outside of Canada? which is kind of a continuation of what we've been talking about, but
So, I mean, if you don't need express entry points, then sure, right? If you were working for a Canadian company and maybe you have enough in your express entry points, or maybe you are able to be speaking French as well as English, and you have a great CRS and you don't need to have more years of experience. If you've met that 1 year, then sure, yeah, maybe you can go work somewhere else in the world for that Canadian company for a little bit, as long as you're not um, working without authorization. And maybe you can continue to have your express entry application processed because of the fact that you have already completed your 1 year of Canadian work experience in the past.
I'm going to put my do not disturb on there. Okay. Next question. Let's pull it up here. So this one is from Tavain, and Tavain says, I have a question. So I submitted my application for a work permit on August the 5th. My NOC code is 9617, and based on, well, LRDC, I don't know if that's IRCC, I'm not sure what that is. It states as an essential occupation, and I want to know what the priority process. So he's basically, what he's asking is, if 9617 is an essential occupation, are they processed faster by the government now? Because there was a time, Alicia, when that was the case.
It's true. There was a time during the pandemic where they were really trying to make sure that essential workers were getting their work permits processed more quickly. As far as I know, they have not been continuing with that process. There is a big backlog, but it is possible that, if there's some public policy that you've seen that says that this NOC code is on the list, but generally they've stopped priority processing of certain NOC codes, and everybody's kind of in the same boat. And there are long processing times right now if you take a look at the IRCC posted processing times.
Yes. Okay, Mary says, are payslips often asked for as mandatory documents post-ITA? FSW, thank you.
So Mary, Mark's got a fantastic course. He's got his express entry course. And this is one of the things that comes up often in terms of how do you document and prove that you have the required work experience, whether it's foreign work experience or Canadian work experience. You said you were under the FSW, so it should probably be foreign work experience. And really making sure that you are properly proving that you have all the years of work experience that you have claimed. And so one of the things is showing that you have that employer record and you've got a letter from your employer, direct supervisor, or HR manager, and then also that you've backed that up. So what do you put in your records of employment, right? How do you bundle those documents? And one of the things to put would be pay slips, right? And other sort of tax documentation. But it really depends upon what sort of letters and what sort of evidence you have already been able to gather and how rock solid it is to show that period of employment.
It's interesting when I look at this over the years, Alicia, clearly certain countries overseas do frequently ask to see payslips. And why is that? Well, because there's a whack of fraud in that particular country or at that visa office. And so they're often going to establish a bar that's higher for some individuals to prove their work experience compared to others. And so, Mary, it really depends. Like Alicia said, it's always better to include them if you have them, because that's the language that IRCC asks. If you submit an application and you don't include them, it's not going to result in your application getting returned as being incomplete, because it is to some extent an optional addition to, the documents that you're providing in addition to the reference letter. But so we will always go out of our way to try to include payslips where we can, because basically we want to limit the officer's discretion down to nothing except one thing, which is to approve. So yes, as Alicia indicated, I'm just going to flip over here and I'll just show some of you who are not aware of this. This is what it looks like when you subscribe to the course. And you can see we have all the modules here. And I want to particularly isolate Module 6, Mastering Your Documents, because one of the things that we have in our Record of Employment section is a little checklist. We've got a bunch of things here, but we've got a record of employment checklist. And I think this should open up if I play my cards right here. Yes. So in this record of employment checklist, this is something that you can give to your employers. And you can see here at the bottom, we recommend that you include pay slips and stubs if you have them, and make sure if you've got them that you include them. We also, in our little course here, have another tool, which is, what if I can't get a reference letter? And sometimes we have those problems. And so, then this little explanation here goes through some of the things that people can do as an extra component to prove their work history when things maybe aren't as perfect as they'd like it to be. So that's just a sample of what's in the course. And when you click on the link in the description in the video, actually, if I go to the YouTube channel, we can probably see it. So if you go to today's and what you're watching here, we'll just pause this. There we go. So if you scroll down, you'll see that access to all of this that we're talking about is here. So you can submit your question, you can book an immigration consultation, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and then our do-it-yourself courses are all listed here. And the Express Entry course and masterclass, if we open that up here, you can see that you can access all the material right now, and then the masterclass will be from September 19th to the 22nd. That's where you can join me live for 1 hour every single day in an intensive cover of the whole Express Entry process and any specific questions that you have. Okay, next question. This one's from Goku Lover. Hi, Mark and Alicia. Do PNP application timelines vary from country to country?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I would say it's more dependent upon the PNP itself. So each province, or most provinces and territories, have some sort of way to do a provincial nomination application. And yes, you can look down through economic class, you can look through and you can say, what are the overall PNP? Keep in mind that some provinces have what's called a paper-based, even if it's an online process now, but a non-express entry linked application process, and then the express entry application process. In general, it's a long time. It's longer for sure than the express entry if you're doing a non-linked PNP application. And really, it depends quite a bit on each province, and each province normally has at least 4 to 8 different subcategories of types of programs that you might be eligible for. And within those, there might be priorities or differences in terms of the processing times. So I don't think it's normally something that it's the country of nationality that people are screening for under the PNPs, but it's the program under which you've applied for that provincial nomination program.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so I think we got that one covered. Let's slide over here. This one is Amara, and Amara says, between the reconsideration approach and the judicial review, which one is faster to address an appeal process, especially when the applicant is adamant that the caseworker has erred?
So Amara, this is one where for sure you should make sure to book a consult right away. And Cedric's our man for doing the judicial reviews, but many of us have had experience in terms of making sure that you're giving good advice on your timelines for judicial review and how to do a reconsideration request. Many times, if you are looking at doing a reconsideration request, you would also be concurrently filing that application for leave and judicial review, because often immigration is not going to respond to your reconsideration request. And so you don't want to miss your time deadline for filing your judicial review. And it's 15 days if that decision was an in-Canada decision, and it's 60 days from the refusal letter if it's an outside Canada decision. So make sure to book a consult really quickly so that you don't miss those time deadlines. And most of the time you actually have to do both at the same time. So you can try to ask for reconsideration. A lot of the times immigration won't pay any attention unless you've also backed it up with an application for leave and judicial review to federal court.
Okay. Okay. T. Lee is back. I have a job interview for a manager job, but I applied as though I was already in Canada while I'm not. Now I'm afraid to tell the employer. What do I do? P.S. I will only get 1 year postgrad work permit at the border. This is
This could be a problem, T. Lee, because you have to make sure that you are being honest with everybody, and you do have to have authorization to work. So if, in fact, you are given your 1 year postgrad work permit, I am a little bit worried about at the border because that
yeah.
isn't normally how the postgrad work permits are issued. So just be careful about what's happening at the border. Make sure that you are
Yeah.
eligible to apply at the
And
border.
I'll jump in and yes, it is possible to submit a postgrad work permit at the port of entry if you are eligible to submit work permits at the port of entry. But the biggest issue is the volatility, and border officers don't like doing it. They don't. And so if you have an option to file for any type of a work permit within Canada, um, postgrad work permit or otherwise, you guys need to remember that when you submit that postgrad work permit application, that generally, well, in many instances, you can work. And so the border officers know that, and they get kind of irritated when people come down. And some of you, maybe without knowing and without having read Alicia's blog and the warnings that we've given, may have worked through the period of when you received that confirmation of graduation until you actually submitted your postgrad work permit if it was online. Or if you hadn't and you decide to go down to the border, sometimes border officers will know the law, sometimes they will, and they will check your phone. And if it shows that you've got a shift that you just finished working, the day before and you graduated from school and it's been 2 weeks, well, that could possibly be determined to be unauthorized work. And IRCC at times can be kind to individuals when they've worked without authorization, but the Canada Border Service Agency can be real jerks and they don't care. And so they can be facilitative at times. And that's why people go down, because they get an instant, adjudication of their work permit, but you don't know everything else that you're exposing yourself to when you go down there.
Yeah, so a couple things, T. Lee. One of them is that let's say you graduated, you completed your studies, and there was a week before you submitted your postgrad work permit. So this is what Mark is saying. If you worked part-time during that week after your studies were completed, but before you submitted your postgrad work permit application, then that is work without authorization. And if you fail to disclose that, it's misrepresentation. If they find that you've worked without authorization, one of the consequences of working without authorization is normally that an officer is not allowed to issue you another work permit for another 6 months since the end of the unauthorized work. So you could basically be tanking half of your postgrad if that's the case. So that's one thing to really be cautious about. The other thing is that most of the time, people who are applying for a postgrad are doing so from within Canada on study permit status. And Cedric and I have been talking about a case where somebody left to go back home after they've applied for the postgrad. They're coming back into Canada. They were allowed back in, but only as a visitor. And so their study permit is not valid anymore. And then this is going to potentially cause a bunch of problems. People are getting stopped by the border saying, now you have no authorization to work and you could get deported. So it can be a big problem. If you are sure that you are getting that postgrad work permit and you do have authorization to work, then that employer has to be able to have that work permit in hand to be able to know that they are eligible to employ you. And then, of course, you've got to go and get your social insurance number. If you are not granted that postgrad work permit, then you're going to have to talk to your employer because you no longer, or you don't have any authorization to work.
All right. Next question is Nisha. And Nisha says, what's the first step for an employer to get an LMIA for a temporary foreign worker inside Canada? Boy, we have had a rush of these, haven't we, Alicia?
Yeah, so it's actually been interesting. Mark and I have been talking to lots of companies recently because it really does seem that employers are not able to find the skilled workers that they are needing right now in Canada. So there are some foreign workers who are inside Canada who are looking to change jobs, or employers are trying to lure them away from another employer.
Yep.
And so, in order for an employer to hire somebody who's already inside Canada as a temporary foreign worker, they would have to hire somebody who has an open work permit if they didn't need an LMIA. So take a look at your LMIA, and when it says employer, if it says any, or if there's no employer specified, then likely you have an open work permit, which means you can work for any employer in any province in any job. Well, it depends. There's an
Mm-hmm.
employer section, there's a job title section, and there's a location section. So make sure that all those things would allow you to work for the employer depending on what job and what province. If you know that that company, a new company, is going to have to get a new LMIA because the employee was on a employer specific work permit in the past, then that new company has to go through and do 4 weeks of advertising recruiting. It's got to be perfect. It's got to meet all the requirements of ESDC. They've got to submit that LMIA application. It's got to be adjudicated or decided by ESDC, which normally takes at least a couple months. It's at about 46 business days right now in terms of processing time for the LMIA. If and only if the company is approved for the LMIA, can the worker then apply to change conditions on their work permit and get a new work permit to work for that new employer. And in the past, it was that the worker couldn't switch until they actually were approved and received that new work permit. There are interim public policy measures that you can, if the LMIA has been approved for the second company, then you can put in a specific request after you've done that work permit application to ask for interim authorization to work, but you've got to do it under that specific public policy really carefully if the LMIA has been approved.
Yes. All right. Chima says, I applied for a super visa, okay, on July 27th, 2022. So we're just, a little over a month ago. And the medicals were cleared on August the 22nd. Eligibility and background check started on August the 23rd. When is the final approval of the visa? Can be expected. So we've looked at this a lot, Alicia, but I'll just pull it up and I'll just share it with everybody. When you are basically, if you go to the IRCC website, this is as good a source as any to determine, at least to some extent, where possible, where it's specific by country, which you didn't indicate, I don't believe, in your question. So we don't know which country, Chima, you're coming from.
India.
But, oh, did it say India on there?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. There it is. Yes, that's right. Okay. So if we go here, you can look and so you basically applied for your super visa, which super visas are traditionally grandparent. Is that, I don't know if that's the case or if we're talking about someone who's looking for a multiple entry, but anyways, if we go here, there's actually processing times for each. So visiting, studying, and working. See, you've got super visa here, and then we just have visitor visa as well. So if it's super visa, you can actually click on here and you can choose where you're from. So we can get a pretty accurate look at this because they updated everything on August the 30th. So 68 days is what they're showing here. And at this stage, this is kind of what we're looking at. So there you go. So you can look it up yourself and you can take a look and go from there. All right. Next question is from the Word Diary. I applied for a visitor visa to attend a conference which passed in July, but I have never received a response from Canadian authorities. Is it possible to receive a positive response yet after the conference has passed? Yeah, this is super disappointing, but it happens. It definitely
Yeah.
does. And I'll add one more little element here, Alicia. So she says, also, if I applied for a student visa now before the visit visa decision is made, won't it hinder my chances at getting it?
Yeah. So possibly and possibly. So usually when you're applying for that visitor visa, it's going to ask you about the purpose of your visit. And normally you're going to be including some sort of letter or explanation or documents to show I'm coming for this conference for this period of time. It's a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. And if the date of that conference, if that conference is done and gone and passed and you weren't able to have your visitor visa processed within that period of time, it's possible that it's just going to get refused because your purpose of visit is is moot. It no longer exists. It does depend on what sort of other evidence that you submitted for your purpose of visit. Like maybe you said you were going to the conference and you were going traveling or for some sort of vacation. Maybe they will still approve it if you have enough evidence to show your temporary intent, that you have ties to your home country, that you're authorized to go, that you have sources of income, that you were able to be returning to a job in your home country. The other complicating factor is if you did apply for a study permit and that TRV has not been decided, then you're going to have to declare that you did have a prior application to Canadian immigration and describe what happened and the fact that you didn't receive a decision on it. And same thing for that study permit, you're going to have to prove what is the reasons for your studies and how you still have a temporary intent even when you're applying for that student visa.
All right. Well, I think, Alicia, we are at 12 p.m. Mountain Time right now. So I think we'll close off the questions for today. We sure appreciate everybody posting them. Your questions make all the difference. That's how these live Q&As can be so effective, because of your good questions. So I want to thank Alicia for joining me today. I want to thank all of you once again for posting your questions. If you would like to have your question potentially featured as our feature question at the beginning of the lives, all you need to do is click on the link, which you can search right down here in the description and find it right here. Submit your question for the next live Q&A, and we will choose one of those questions out of there to be our feature question. And so you can do that right in here. And yes, the person that asks the question that we feel is the best will become the feature question. But we're always here, and we have set this up to make it a live Q&A to answer all of your questions. And yeah, it's designed to give you guys support in ways that you're just not going to get anywhere else. The last little piece that we'll point to is the fact that we have a number of DIY courses coming up here. And in September, we have the spousal sponsorship course is accessible right now. And I highly recommend that if you are considering subscribing, that you do it early so you have time to go through everything. And then when the master classes kick in October 17th to the 20th for the spousal, you have lots of time to prepare. And that same thing goes for just about everything. Now, with the postgrad work permit, this is still open all the way through to the end of the year, December 31st. And same story. When we get people, once we get enough of a critical mass, then I will do another masterclass, because I've already done a couple. And then finally, the one that's coming up the right away here is the Express Entry course with the masterclass September 19th to the 22nd. So definitely subscribe, go through the videos, and then come the days of the master classes, 1 hour every evening. And right now it's kind of between 4 to 5 p.m. Generally speaking, Mountain Time, but that is accessible. So I recommend that you check that out. All right. Well, Alicia, another week in the books. We got one more day tomorrow, Friday, and then the weekend is here. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next week.